My name is Gabriel Sahlgren. I'm the research director at the Center for Market Reform of Education, also an affiliated researcher with the Research Institute of Industrial Economics in Stockholm, Sweden. I was the chair today at the Capita Conference for Free Schools, and I normally do research into school choice related issues, education policy in general, etc., stuff like that. Generally, since 1988, education funding in this country has been based on per pupil funding, which essentially means that a parent chooses a school and then the school gets money for that child. There are certain differences, and specifically with the lag time. So it's a very complicated pupil funding formula. It's not even all over the country, and this is something the government currently is addressing by implementing a national funding formula. So it's going to be even more similar to a voucher system. And what I mean by that is essentially money follows the pupil. That's the essence of a voucher. Then you have all the other kind of details that come with it, and they differ all over the world. But that's the essence, that there are financial rewards and, well, in general, implications of attracting more children and losing more children. First of all, the current system is better than it has been before. In England, it's been extremely complicated and difficult to set up new schools. And one of the key conditions for an education market to function is, to a certain extent at least, supply-side flexibility. You need to be able, with relative ease, to open up new schools, and bad schools have to go out of business. This has not occurred in England before. Now, we do have suddenly a mechanism to start new schools, the Free Schools program, since 2010. The problem with that is that it's more akin to something like outsourcing. And the reason for this is that the government currently commits to fund all these schools, the capital funding. It provides that, basically. That means that you can't approve all providers, even though they might be perfectly good educators. And that's something that needs to be changed. There are also many kind of burdensome requirements on schools that are necessary. What my solution to these things is, first of all, a relaxation of ownership requirements. I argue that profit-making companies should not only be able to run schools as they currently can because of outsourcing from a charitable trust. Instead, I argue that they should be able to own schools because that creates a dynamic incentive to scale up excellence, to open new schools perhaps, or even just increase the size of one school if it's performing well. We currently don't have that incentive in the system. Another thing that I would change is to, instead of having all these elaborate requirements and a process where the government essentially tries to pick winners, I would say instead we need a minimum requirement, a couple of minimal requirements, and then let the schools fund their buildings themselves. And they have to find the capital in the market for that. And there's a reason for why this is a good thing, because if you want to replicate a market, you should also play on on a level playing field. And if schools can't find backers for their proposals, maybe they shouldn't open in the first place. Now, this would be more advantageous for for-profit schools because they can target investors in the marketplace. Non-profit schools we could deal with via PFI schemes and other, so help them get private capital as well. But this idea that the government funds all of these schools is going to be too expensive. And I think the idea that you can pick winners is illusory. We've seen many free schools fail, and it's very difficult to predict in advance. And that's why, in order to scale up the system, we simply need lower requirements. Building requirements have to go as well, and generally ownership requirements have to be relaxed. When it comes to the lower requirements, I'm just saying it's very difficult to predict who's going to be in a good school and not. Sure, we want to maintain minimum requirements, but the current system where the government is picking winners has obviously failed because there are many free schools failing at the moment. So it's illusory to say that provides more accountability. Instead, we have to focus on the outcomes of these schools. We have to focus on how they actually produce, what type of outcomes they produce. Look at the results. And then if they fail, as they do still, and there's failure in the state system as well, ensure that we can close those schools in an orderly fashion so pupils can migrate from them and attend better schools. And that's why you also need a mechanism to scale up the good schools. This is something we've been trying to find in education since whenever. I mean, forever, essentially. There are plenty of good schools in the world. There are plenty of good schools in England, but we don't know how we can scale them up. And this is something that the profit motive introduces in education. If you have strong demand, sure, we do need some form of accountability to the government as well. We do have Ofsted, we do have league tables and so on and so forth. But with that, you can basically ensure that supply meets demand, which is not the case in the current context.
So find a way to scale up good schools and find a way when schools are failing to shut them down in an efficient way so that those students don't suddenly experience a sudden vacuum, but they can move to a school that's better.
Absolutely, of course.
Great. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, I mean, it is. I mean, education is a very tricky issue. But as I said in my remarks, my final remarks at this conference, it is also a sector of society that's very different from most other sectors. We haven't evolved for over 150 years. The current system was set up, essentially a Bismarckian model to produce soldiers, or at least very, very good citizens that are in line with whatever the state wants it to be in line. This is we live in a very different society, and education has to be innovative. It has to adapt to the new society that we live in order to produce better outcomes for children in the long run, for the country, via greater economic efficiency, and so on and so forth.